probably never leave me. And it was not necessarily in my treatment, but in the treatment of somebody else that I observed. This is this person who's unable to speak, and she's, having that treatment. They have lasers, they have music going, and I think the whole office came in and started singing this song together to encourage her to be able to speak. And you just don't find that everywhere. That compassion for someone, and that the uniqueness to come and want to be a part of it and sing with joy and love, like that will probably never leave my mind. Like I honestly, I got goosebumps when I was watching it, and I thought, oh, God is most definitely present here.
So as a caregiver, you hold so much of their trauma in yourself. For me personally, I was trying to take his trauma, trying to take his pain, trying to take all of that into my own body so that he didn't have to feel that. And I thought that I had let it go, but until I sat with Dr. Jerry, I had not let go of it, obviously, because I still felt that tension in my body. But as soon as she did that to me, it was like a full release of just everything. And I let out a huge breath, and Jaden let out a huge breath at the exact same time that I did. We're so connected that if I let my trauma go from this situation, he'll feel that trauma leave his body too. And then he can feel the peace, then I think he has the opportunity to heal.
I'll get started then. My name's Julianna Pinson. I am a speech-language pathologist. I've been practicing for 20 years, and I've been for the past 14 years at Speak Freely, which is a clinic in Austin. I am primarily at our Bastrop, Texas office, 4 days a week there, but I'm in Austin 1 day a week. And I never started out to be a feeding therapist. It kind of scared me, very honestly, but as time has gone on, it has just been a need, and so I've added to my toolbox to meet the needs of the clients that I'm currently seeing. So understanding your child's diagnosis. So every child that has a feeding issue is going to get a couple of diagnoses. Dysphagia is just difficulty in swallowing. If you have a medical diagnosis of dysphagia, there are different classifications based on where the issues are happening. So oral just means mouth cavity. Difficulty preparing the food, chewing the food, and moving the food through the mouth. Oropharyngeal is that space kind of between at the very back of the mouth and your throat, and it's moving from the mouth into the throat. Pharyngeal is moving it through the throat safely. The big challenge there is this is where your esophagus and your trachea kind of come together. So if it's not being protected in this area, you can get food going down the trachea, and that's when we get aspiration. We get aspiration pneumonia, which we all know is very bad. Pharyngoesophageal would be moving from the throat or the pharynx back into the esophagus, and then esophageal is actually moving through the esophagus. Now that's not a speech-language pathologist area. Most of the interventions for that area are medical. They're beginning to have some other treatments that are kind of like biofeedback based from what I can understand. But it's just generally not an area that, as a therapist, I can do much about, because it's so much. I mean, even think about yourself. Once it moves into your esophagus, it's beyond your control. That is your body's natural mechanisms taking over, and that's what we expect to be working. And if those aren't working, then we're looking at more of a medical procedure to try to change that. Some other diagnoses you might have run across are pediatric feeding disorder. This is a relatively new disorder. And it just means impaired oral intake that's not age appropriate, and is usually associated with some sort of medical, nutritional, feeding skill, and or psychosocial dysfunction. So something is not right. They're not eating enough of what they should be. They're not eating the right kinds of food. They're only eating a very, very limited variety of food. It says age appropriate, but I would also put, relative to their developmental level as well. Because we're talking about kids who, well, hold on, let me back up. Feeding is a developmental process. And we need to look at, for your children, where were they before their injury and where are they now? If your child was only eating purees at the time of their injury and now they're 12, I am not going to start off with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because they've never had the experience of that. That just would be too big a jump to expect them to have any sort of competency with that. That would really scare me. So that is a factor that is a little different in kids with traumatic brain injury. We want to know where they were and how are they relative to where they were now. If they were on purees and they're still on purees and now they're 12, well, that's a little bit of a different story. That's where we're going to try to move them through developmentally. Okay, what are the next steps? So your child might get a diagnosis of pediatric feeding disorder, particularly if it's been kind of a recent event or a recent injury. We have codes for acute, we have codes for chronic, and it kind of encompasses some of those things beyond the dysphagia. The fact that, yes, they have trouble swallowing, but that's not their only issue because they're kids and they have different experiences and they have different reactions to those experiences. For kids who've been intubated, that is not comfortable. It makes your throat feel terrible, and it's usually forced upon you when because you need to breathe, and that is the most important part. But that experience can make you very leery of people coming at your mouth and coming at you with things towards your throat. And they may generalize that to food as well. So those are things that can contribute to that diagnosis. Again, it's sort of like dysphagia, but more than just the dysphagia. It can co-occur with dysphagia and ARFID. Now, ARFID's a little different. ARFID does not co-occur with dysphagia. So that would mean there's no mechanical issues, there's no motor issues. It is just they are not eating the way they should, but they could. And then that becomes a different question of, well, why aren't they? ARFID is actually considered to be a mental health disorder. It is not something a speech-language pathologist would treat. However, it can co-occur with PFD, which is treated by a speech-language pathologist. So I wouldn't expect most of your kids to have that, but if they do, that is something that would be definitely sort of a multidisciplinary treatment approach, and particularly the sensory issues. And finding like an occupational therapist who knows about feeding therapy, who is willing to, or has some training to approach that from a sensory standpoint, that would be the kind of person I would recommend for that kind of thing. But speech-language pathologist for sure can do dysphagia, for sure can do pediatric feeding disorder. There are some occupational therapists who will do some of the mechanical aspects of feeding, so some of those dysphagia kind of things, but they tend to do more about the oral skills and more of like the feeding the hand skills. Then a speech-language pathologist is more likely to address like the actual mechanisms of swallowing. So we do have, there's quite a bit of overlap between our fields. There are no hard lines, and a lot of it depends on the individual, their training, and what they feel comfortable with. For example, I am trained in vital stim. If I wasn't trained in vital stim, I probably wouldn't have much to offer for pharyngeal dysphagia. That's one of the few things that we have that addresses that area particularly. Now, I can do a lot with the mouth, but pharyngeal dysphagia, for example, specifically, somebody needs to have some specific tools and training for that. If your child is being tube fed and you're wanting to move, or I assume most people are wanting to move toward oral feeding, know that there are a lot of differences. When it's a tube feeding, somebody else decides when I eat. Oral feeding, I eat when I want to or when I feel hungry. When you've been tube fed for a while and it's always been on a schedule, it is different to know when you're hungry. That is a basic bodily sensation that, especially for young children, they may not have a label for. They may know, I don't feel great, I don't feel right, but they may not know, oh, it's hunger and I should eat. Another thing that's different is somebody else decides what I eat, and it's usually the same thing because tube feedings don't have much variety. Sometimes some of the blended foods do have some different recipes, and if you have that option, go for it. When we eat by our mouth, we get to pick what we eat. Even a child doesn't necessarily get to pick what's on the menu, but they eat what's on their plate, or they don't. They choose what foods they're going to eat first and what foods they're going to eat last. Tube feeding somebody else decides how much I eat. When we're oral feeders or oral eaters, we eat what we want or until we feel full. And sometimes we keep eating after that if we really like it. Tube feeding somebody else decides how fast I eat. If I'm eating by mouth, I have to eat at the speed I want or feel comfortable at, and I have to control that. That is not something that is a natural sometimes, especially for kids who've been tube fed for a while. They don't know how to adjust the rate. And that can be an issue as well when their stomach is not ready to accept the volume of food they want to put in there, or the mechanics of eating are such that it makes them have to be slow. Another thing is that somebody else decides when I'm done. Oral eaters, people who eat by mouth, we get to decide when we're done eating and when we feel full. That can also be an internal signal that kids who are tube fed kind of lose, because they don't recognize, like, oh, it's time to stop. If I don't, I'm going to throw up. They haven't had that signal being in there. They've had somebody else decide, this is how much you get, this is how fast, this is when we stop. And then when they start to orally eat, they're like, yeah, this is feeling good. I like this. I like the flavor. And they just keep eating. And then you're like, well, you're going to throw up because your body can't handle that massive food. So there are a lot of things that are different between tube feeding and oral feeding. So beyond just the process of chewing the food and moving the food through your mouth and swallowing. So all of those things are different, and expect them to be something that after a TBI, there may be things, or after being tube fed for a while for whatever reason, actually, those aren't things that may naturally kick in. They may be things that have to be adjusted to with time, and it may be something they need some help with. So if your child is tube fed and you're wondering, are we ready to feed by mouth? Can your child maintain homeostasis in an upright position? So what I mean by that is, can they keep their oxygen saturation levels? Can they keep their temperature? Can they keep their pulse rate within a normal range while they're sitting upright? We need them to be sitting upright, because if you're lying on your back, food is going to fall back before you can catch it. And that is true for all of us. None of us drink and eat real well if we're lying down. It does not have to be a seated at 90 degree position. It can be semi-reclined, but your body is going to prioritize breathing, as it should. So if your child is not able to maintain their cardiovascular support and their pulmonological support while they're upright, they're probably not going to be a great eater, because their body's going to say, hey, we can't handle eating, we got to focus on staying alive. How well are their tube feedings being tolerated? Are they still on, are they on a very slow rate, or are you doing bolus feeds? You have to very carefully manage like the volume that comes in over time, or can they tolerate, kind of having it spread out more, or having some bolus feeds? These are not exclusionary criteria. If your child is working towards them, that doesn't mean you're not ready for feeding therapy. It is something to consider, though. Is your child safe to swallow? Have they had a swallow study? Have they had an endoscopic study? Is food going down their airway, or is food, going the way it's supposed to? Are there textures and consistencies that they can swallow safely? Some kids aren't safe on thin liquids, but they're okay if it's thickened. Some kids aren't good on any liquids, but they can handle a puree, which is like a baby food. Some kids are not great with purees, but they can handle a cracker. It's not all one or none. Do they swallow reflexively? If not, can it be stimulated? What other oral reflexes are present? If you put something in your child's mouth, do they automatically bite down on it? If they do, it's going to be hard to get them to move their teeth to chew and release the food and move it to swallow. Is your child swallowing their saliva? It's a good indication of, oh, we have good sensation, we're swallowing it. Or I don't really feel all this saliva in my mouth, it's pouring out the side of my mouth. Those are things that are going to indicate, hey, there's going to be some prerequisite steps for them to move toward oral feeding, or hey, they might be able to kind of move fairly quickly. And how do they tolerate anybody touching or putting things around their face and their mouth? Unfortunately, for most of our kids, there's going to have to be, at some level of feeding therapy, somebody's going to have put their hands on or in and around their face. And if your child is not comfortable with that, that's not going to be very pleasant for them. It can feel very invasive. Just like when somebody comes at, especially if like somebody you didn't know came at you with something and said, hey, open up, I need to get right in the back, you would be a little uncomfortable because it's invading your personal space. And this is, our mouth is actually it's a way into our body. We have some pretty strong desires to protect it. If your child is not tolerating anything around their face and mouth, feeding therapy is going to have to start probably back at that sensory level. And it may be a while before you can get to the actual eating. So if you don't think your child is ready based on some of those things I said, here's some things you can do now. Get your child comfortable with people touching their face and putting things in their mouth. Do it in a playful way. Do it in a fun way. Make it a positive experience. If your child is, if every time you're around your child's face it's because you have to like wipe, or it's because you're suctioning, that's not always very pleasant. Play with them. Do something fun. Even if you can just make it, a little bit lighter, a little bit more fun, make it more of a positive experience, so then they're not going to be as defensive when a therapist wants to come at their face with whatever tools or food they might be trying to get them to work on. Give them a lot of just sensory experiences to their body, their face, and their mouth. Our sensory system generally, we're more comfortable with things away from our mouth before we're comfortable with things towards our mouth. So if your child is not comfortable with things around their mouth, how about their face? Can you wipe their face? Will they tolerate different textures on their face? If not their face, then what about their arms? If not their arms, well, what about their legs? Generally, we start away from the mouth and work towards the mouth. If I have a new client coming in, that is the order that I introduce things in. I make sure they're okay with it on their body before I come at their mouth. Also because that's just a little nicer than starting right for the mouth, because again, it feels invasive. Use a variety of materials and tools. You can use towels, bath mitts, hand puppets, stuffed animals, fabric squares. There are oral hygiene tools, which toothbrushes, infant toothbrushes, toddler toothbrushes are very easy to get. If you have been given those oral swabs that they use to either moisten your child's mouth or to help absorb some of the saliva, those can be great. Just remember that the soft tissues in your mouth are the ones that sense tactile input. So if you're only brushing their teeth, they may feel some pressure, but that's going to be it. Your tongue, the inside of your cheeks, your lips, the inside of your lips, those are the areas that have the tactile sensors that are really going to help maximize that sensory input to the mouth. Some other things you might try would be some oral sensory tools or toys, ones that vibrate. There's different shapes, there's different kind of densities. You could go on Amazon and type in oral sensory and a whole plethora of things can come up. You do not need to invest a lot of money in it though, because there are some things that are really, they're not that special, except they come from a therapy company, and so then they're going to cost a little more. So look for things that are similar. Look for things that, hey, this silicone kitchen tool looks like that would be interesting to feel. As long as it's a safe material, try it. If pieces come off, it's done and it's time to throw it away. Other things to think about is go slow and respect your child's limits. And when in doubt, err on the side of caution. Your child has opinions and they have things that they're not okay with, but they may not have as many ways to communicate that I am not comfortable with this and I don't like this and I want it to stop. And there's quite a few times, I'm sure, in their lives where there's things that they don't like and they have to go through because it's just what they need to do for medical treatment. Those are things that we can't give them the option of opting out of. I'm sorry, you can't not have your blood drawn. We need your blood drawn. We need this information. I'm sorry, we have to do this procedure, this breathing treatment, which is you don't like because you have to do it. This is not something that pushing through it is going to be helpful in the long run. Kids will just learn that I have to deal with this and nobody's listening to me saying no. Now your child can say no in a number of ways. Think about how they communicate that they don't like something. And if they don't like it, well then at what point did they start to communicate that? Do they communicate it in their body language? Do they communicate it with their voice? Do they communicate it with their face? Are they pushing things away? Are they turning their head away? Are they arching their back? Those are all signs that I do not like this. Now that doesn't mean, oh, this is a wall, we can't get over it. What it does mean is I need to back off. I need to back away. I need to slow down. I need to work in smaller steps. Pay attention to those signals, because a child that you ignore those signals with is going to put up as many walls as they can, because it doesn't feel safe to them. And as a therapist, I could say I would rather see a child who has a very strong no and it's been listened to than a child that had even a weak no and it got overridden. Because at some point, we want them to be able to eat on their own. And if it's not a pleasant experience and you've learned that, it is very hard to convince a child that it is a fun and good thing. You will get a kid who will eat the minimum amount of food and the minimum amount of variety they absolutely positively need to, because they don't enjoy it. And at some point we want them to be independent. We want them to enjoy it. How many of you don't like to eat? I mean, we all have foods we don't like to eat, but most of us enjoy eating. It is a positive experience, and it's one we have to do to keep our bodies alive. And part of being an independent eater is that you eat the food you need to keep your body alive. And it should, as often as we do it, really, we eat 3 times a day. I don't like flossing, but I'll do it once a day. I like eating, and I'll eat 5 and 6 times a day. That's, it's good because that's what keeps my body going. If it was something I didn't like, it would probably be something I'd put off. So these are some ththings that I just talked about. There's a Nook brush over here on the side. Those are oral swabs. That's a Z-Vibe. That's a Sensi. Those are both vibrating tools. There's chewy teas. There's grabbers. There's all kinds of teething or chulery kinds of things, and I put a bath mitt up there. I have sensory pillows. They are pillows of different fabrics. They are cut into a rectangular shape, and they are not anything special. But I have satin, and I have corduroy, and I have terry cloth, and I have felt, and I have flannel, and they're just different textures. That's all they are. For the kids who need to have more of a fun game play kind of perspective, then I use the hand puppets and I use bath mitts, because that seems more, if that seems more fun, that it waves to them and then it goes to tickle them instead of me just going with the pillows and brushing them, I'll do that. That's fine. I don't mind doing that. Other things that you need to consider before you start feeding therapy is, are there any medical issues that are related that need to be under control? Doesn't mean you can't have them, but if your body is telling you it is not comfortable to eat because it hurts, it's very difficult to convince somebody that is a good, that you should eat. So reflux. If the reflux is under medication, great. If reflux is occasional, not so bad. If they're having constant reflux all the time, that does not feel good, and it does not inspire you to want to eat. Bowel movements. If they're constipated, they're not going to have as much space in their stomach to put food. You tend to feel full, and there's no room to put anything down there. Also, your belly can just kind of hurt, and that doesn't inspire you to want to put more in your belly. Also, food intolerances or allergies. That doesn't mean necessarily you break out in hives. It can just mean every time we give her milk, she just seems so uncomfortable. She coughs so much. Those kinds of things. Those are things that are very helpful to know and to kind of get under control before you start feeding therapy, because it's very disheartening to find out the one food they ate is the food that upsets their stomach. Working on their motor skills, getting trunk support, sitting upright, sitting with support, getting some head control. Our swallowing all happens up here. Our head rests on our trunk. If your trunk is not stable, chances are it's going to affect how you eat. That doesn't mean if your trunk isn't stable you shouldn't eat. It just means you're going to need support. That's a great thing to talk to your child's physical therapist or occupational therapist about. Think about how you can make tube feedings more like meal times. Can you put it more on a mealtime schedule? Can they have their tube feedings around the time that somebody else is eating, preferably in the same place that they're eating, so then maybe they can smell and hear what other people are doing. You know, most of us eat with people and enjoy eating with people. If you're always being fed in your bed in a room with just one other person, that's not quite the same experience. And that can mean when you're switching to oral feeding, it becomes very overwhelming. But if you can expose your child to the experience of a mealtime, even if they're just being tube fed and you know they're not actually going to have food in their mouth at the time, but they're with the family, they're hearing the noise, they're hearing the dishes, that can help them prepare for becoming part of that mealtime experience a little bit more. You know, if your child has to be fed, you know, in one location, what can you do to make that more meal-like? Can you bring a table near? Can you light a candle that smells like apple pie or birthday cake or whatever smell you think would make you hungry? Something like that, because those tube feedings, you don't really get to smell them. And if you do, it may not yeah, they don't really smell that great. There is some evidence that you can taste from a tube feeding. Now, whether that's actually a taste receptor or it may just be a little bit of the reflex coming back up, that's up for debate. But you don't get that. Now, a big part of our taste is smell. If you can't smell, like when you have a cold, most people don't eat as well. If you have damage to your olfactory bulb, which is this big clump of nerves in your nose, people don't eat as well. They start going for extra salt, extra sugar, extra pepper, extra hot sauce, because they have to increase the flavor because it's not appealing. So if you can even add some smell input while your child is eating, that's great. That's increasing it and making it a little bit more like what an oral feeder would experience. All right, so if you are ready to start feeding therapy, work towards it, here's some things to think about. What are your goals? What do you want your child to be able to do? What do you want them to participate in? For some people, it's, I just want them to be able to go to a friend's birthday party and not throw up because they smelled the food. For some people, it's, you know, I really just want them to be able to have a taste of something. So they can, you know, they can just enjoy it just a little bit, you know, just for a quality of life experience. For other people, I really want them to be able to, you know, eat enough by mouth that we only have to use the tube for medicine or in case they're sick. Think about what your personal goals are, and it may not be as much about the food as the experience and being involved in, you know, what's important. Sometimes it's quality, sometimes it's quantity. What are realistic next steps? If your goal is for them to eat Thanksgiving dinner with the family and enjoy all of the dishes, please be prepared to think about what would be the next thing for where they are now. Maybe that's, hey, we're going to try a little gravy. We're going to try a little mashed potato. Hey, if I mash up this cranberry jelly, maybe they could try that. You know, I would say most people want their children to be 100% independent oral eaters, just like any child their own age. You got to start somewhere. Just remember that. And prepare to be flexible, because when the therapist says, hey, they're not ready for that, where we need to start is XYZ, take that into consideration, that it's not because they're saying your goal is not achievable, it's just they're just saying it's not where we're going to start. And if they say, hey, you know, maybe drinking, you know, eating a 9-course meal is not going to be, you know, something that we realize in the near future, prepare to say, hey, what would be more then? What would be more than we're doing right now? And yeah, just know that sometimes it's not as fast as you want it to be, and you may not be starting where you think you are. Get your information together. Think about how your child ate before their injury. Again, feeding is developmental. So if your child was only eating baby food or only drinking from a bottle before their injury and now they're 5, all they've ever experienced is liquids through a bottle, or all they've ever experienced is baby food that was fed to them via spoon. That is helpful information for the therapist to know. If your child never liked broccoli, it's unlikely they're just going to suddenly think broccoli is okay unless their sensation is really, really, really poor. What kinds of reports would be helpful for that therapist you'll be seeing? Any related medical things, neurology, gastroenterology, ear, nose, throat, any imaging studies, modified barium swallow studies, a swallow study, an emptying study, the flexible endoscopic evaluation of swallowing, which is a FEES, the MRI, the CT scan. As a therapist, I want to know what part of their brain may be working differently. I want to know, has anybody looked at their swallowing? If you can't get a hold of the reports, that's okay. Just remember who did them so that you can sign a release of information and they can request it. If there are things that you can't put your hands on, but you think you remember, oh, they said XYZ, tell the therapist that, because that is just really, really helpful. Evaluations and progress reports from occupational therapy, physical therapy, and dietary nutrition are also very helpful. I'm not saying you have to give them a telephone book of worth of paper. Just letting them know, hey, we have been seeing an occupational therapist, they're working on this, here's their information. Their physical therapist said, that they're okay to sit for about 15 minutes as long as they have XYZ. That kind of information is really helpful because feeding isn't just the swallowing. It's where your body is and how you hold your body in space and can you handle the sensory information. If you're looking for a therapist, I would get recommendations. Ask doctors, ask other parents. Look who's in network with your insurance. That is a big factor for a lot of people. Look on internet directories of specialists. If you find, for example, there's an organization called Feeding Matters that is just for parents and family and professionals who deal with feeding. And they have a list online of providers, people who say, hey, yeah, I'm interested in feeding and I would like to see more feeding clients. That is a great place to start. Ask some questions. Look at what they're saying about themselves, if they have a website or if they have a bio somewhere. What are they interested in? What are their trainings? What trainings have they been to? Yeah, just do some research and ask some questions. Not everybody has a big internet presence. So it's always okay to email and be like, hey, I'm looking for this. What's your background in this? What kind of trainings? What's your philosophy? What kind of techniques do you use? I know for myself and at my clinic, we have a pretty good size waiting list. So think about what's most important to you now. Is it important to get on the wait list of the person who is the specialist of specialists in your area? Or is it more important to get things rolling? Are you okay starting somewhere and then maybe looking to transition somewhere else? Or is it more, is it most important that you find someplace nearby that you can go to frequently without being a huge burden for travel and time? Think about who's going to fit with your child, yourself, and your family, and trust your gut. If you're not comfortable talking to them on the phone, chances are it's going to be a little uncomfortable trying to do therapy with them, especially with feeding, where I feel like trust is a really big issue. You've got to trust the person who's feeding you, because if you don't, then you're not going to eat well. You just aren't. If you're like, we've been here for a while and I'm just not sure this is the right place for us, keep looking. That doesn't mean you have to quit, but it may mean, hey, we just put out some feelers and see if there's a better fit for our family somewhere else. So that initial evaluation with the speech therapist, questions. Oh, there will be so many questions. And questionnaires. I have paperwork I want you to fill out. I have paperwork, I have an online questionnaire I want you to fill out before you come in. When in doubt, please mention it. I have had numerous times where somebody has said at the very end, oh, I don't know if this is important, but, and then proceed to say something that I was totally not expecting and totally does change my picture. Hey, I don't know if this is relevant, but here it is. Please throw it in. You would be surprised what might be a clue because feeding is so multidimensional. If you can get copies of things, great. If not, just be prepared to provide some information so they can request those documents. Part of my initial evaluation is always an oral mechanism evaluation. How are things moving? Are things moving? How do they handle me touching them? How do they handle me wearing gloves around them? Some kids who've been through a lot of medical trauma really don't like people with gloves. It's scary because they do things that hurt. If that's the case, then I know that's something that is going to indicate to me that I'm going to have to really go slow. I want to look at their mouth, their jaw, their cheeks, their lips, their tongue. I want to see if those structures are moving the way I expect them to. Are they moving as far as I expect them to? Are they moving in the direction I expect them to? Do they have the strength I would expect? If the child's mouth is open all the time, like this, I may be wondering if their jaw, has the strength to maintain a closed position, because that's actually when the muscle is shorter, is when your mouth is closed. It is actually extended when it's open. How do they coordinate their movements? Does their movement look like it's, pretty slow? Is it kind of soft looking? Are they hard and fast on everything? That's sometimes the case. And then the other part I will always do at an initial evaluation is a feeding observation. If your child doesn't eat anything, that's okay. I may be just putting things in their mouth to see if that's going to be, something they can tolerate. I may put something in their mouth to just see, what kind of reflexes do we have there. If your child does eat anything, please bring some familiar foods. It's terrible when you get in there and you're like, well, I don't think they're eating it well, but I'm not sure if it's because they don't like this, have never had it, or they really don't know how to handle it. I want to see what your child can do, kind of at the best. So bring something they like and they're familiar with. My goldfish crackers may not taste the same as your goldfish crackers, so bring some from home. Any familiar cups and spoons are great, because again, I want to know what they're best at, not necessarily what I have on hand, because there are umpteen kinds of cups out there. And I don't have an example of all of them. So if your child does use a cup or a straw or a bottle or any other kind of container, if your child drinks from a bowl, please bring it with you. If your child uses thickener, bring some, because there are different brands and different kinds. And what I have on hand may not be what your child is used to having. It can affect the flavor. And they're not all apples to apples. So bring some with you. If your child tends to be, especially if they tend to be anxious or easily overwhelmed, bring something that's comforting or soothing or relaxing for them. If that's music on your phone, bring that. If that is watching a movie on your phone, make sure you've got something downloaded that you can play quickly. If it's a particular toy or a blanket, please bring that with you. Feeding therapy can be stressful and it can be overwhelming. So whatever you can bring that's going to help your child have a more positive experience, the therapist will really appreciate. If your child needs glasses, please bring the glasses. If they're not seeing the food, that can be an issue. Anything that they need to support their seat. For example, if your child is typically, in a wheelchair, but you feed them in a feeding chair, that's like one of those tumble form chairs, please bring that. Or ask the therapist, do I need to bring that? Whatever your child might need for communication, if your child uses a communication device, please bring that with you. If your child uses it to say no and stop, I want to be able to hear that. If you're not sure, ask. Especially, like a walker or the braces and splints, maybe not so important, but a wheelchair could be important, because that's usually, customized for your child and what they need for support. There's a number of pieces, and I'm sorry I'm talking fast, but I'm getting towards the end of my time, I believe. So I'm going to talk fast, but please know I will stop for questions at the end. One of the big pieces for feeding is sensory, and I have it first because I feel like it affects so many other pieces. Nothing really exists in a vacuum. It's never just sensory or just motor or just cognitive. Everything interacts with itself, or interacts with other pieces rather. So I have example problems. A lot of these example problems do not only relate to sensory. They only eat, or they're better with certain foods. They gag. They're extremely picky. They overstuff where they just keep cramming food in their mouth. They take tiny, tiny, tiny bites. Part of my treatment then is going to focus on, can I normalize that sensation? If the child is gagging in response to even just smelling things, well then I need to get that, if we're gagging just to smells, we're probably not going to be ready to eat it real soon. We need to work on getting that normalized. A lot of the treatment approaches below, and there are a bunch, work on just like a progressive desensitization, basically. What kind of small changes can we make that will be tolerated? How can we get this a little bit closer to where we want it to be? That food chaining is, I think, a trademarked method as well, but it's basically, I mean, it's been a technique in a number of other approaches. It's just to make small changes. If your child accepts a puree from a pouch but does it from a bowl, how could we get that closer? How could we change that? How can we make a small change to, oh, they only eat Pringles. Well, what flavors of Pringles? There's a bunch of flavors of Pringles. Would they eat flavored potato chips? Would they eat flavored Lay's? What kinds of small changes can we try that will move us away from where we are and towards a wider variety? Here's what some of the sensory work with a child during feeding therapy might look like. And know that it may work like play. It may look like play. And that is what it should be. It should be fun. It should be enjoyable. And if your child's not ready to sit at a table for whatever reason, then yeah, we'll sit on the floor. In that lower left-hand corner, you can see spaghetti that they have dyed some outrageous colors. You can see in that upper right corner that he's playing in a box of what looks like, to me, graham cracker crumbs. Because children learn through play, and it should be a positive experience. And if eating is not a positive experience, then I'm going to try to set up a scenario where interacting with the food is more fun, more enjoyable, just to tolerate it. You can see in that picture in the middle, they're in a therapy room, they're on a mat, and they have a snack that they're sharing. Some of the other pictures, they're at a table, and they have different plates of food. So it may look like play. Our goal is not that your child play with their food, our goal is that they'll eat it. But if this is the step we need to go through to get to where we want to go, that's okay. Just know that when we say ask your child to play with your food, that is not our end goal. I have family I don't want them to play with their food. I know you don't, but this is kind of where they are and where they need to go through to get to actually eating it. This is a general sensory progression. Do I tolerate looking at it? Can it be in the same room as me? Can it be near my plate? Can it be on my plate? Can I touch it? For how long am I willing to touch it? I have kids who'll do just like as short as possible, but you can't really eat that way. You kind of got to tolerate for a little longer when you eat it. Can they smell it? Can they tolerate the smell? I have a kid who cannot eat in a cafeteria because he cannot tolerate the smells of everybody else's food. He also doesn't like to watch other people eat, which is very, very difficult in a public school cafeteria. Will you touch it to your mouth? We'll ask kids, hey, can you kiss it? Meaning, will you touch it to your lips? Can you touch it to your tongue? Will you lick it? How much will they put on their tongue? Will they really put their tongue all over it? Or are they only touching it to that very tip of their tongue? And then the next steps toward eating are, can I put it in my mouth and then spit it out? Can I put it in my mouth and take a bite and then spit it out? Sometimes these steps go really fast. Sometimes they go really slowly. It just depends on the kid. And that's okay. I would rather go at their speed, even if it's slow, to get them more comfortable, because my goal is not that they'll eat because I tell them to eat, but they'll eat because they want to eat. And that means they need to be accepting of all of what that contains. So things you can do if your child is having some sensory issues outside of therapy. Please do whatever your therapist recommends. But respect your child's no. If they're telling you no, there's a reason. And again, I would rather have you go slow and listen to that than roughshod over it and end up with other issues further down the road. Know your child's sensory system. Do they tend to be kind of like half asleep a lot of the time, or are they like jittery and wound up? What makes them more alert? If they're the kind that are really, edgy, what brings them down and relaxes them? What kinds of things do they like? What kinds of things do they try to seek out? Oh, they love looking at flashing lights. Oh, they just love, rubbing their face in, blankets and sweaters and things like that. What kinds of things do they not like? What kinds of things do they avoid? They can't stand it when I play this kind of music. They just seem really out of sorts whenever, I put this one particular jacket on them. I have a kiddo right now who cannot stand pants. His mother got him into like a knee-length short onesie, and we were thrilled because he just can't stand how it feels. He really doesn't like any of the things that I use for tactile input either. But because his mom knows that about him, we don't push it. For him, it may not indicate he's not willing to try it as a food as long as somebody else holds it. How can you change what they're already eating in a very small, controlled way? I put multiple things down here. Don't try to change them all at the same time. Change one. can you change how it tastes or how it smells? I put those together because it's very hard to change one and not change the other. Appearance. Now that can be the color, that can be the size, that can be the shape. If your child always has sausage links, what would they do with a sausage patty? If you always cut their sandwich into triangles, could you cut it into squares? Can you change how it feels? Can you change the temperature? Even if your child is only on purees, you can try a warm one versus a cold one. You can try a sour one versus a sweet one. You can try a purple one versus an orange one. Also think about the environment. If you have gone from being fed solely in your bed with just one other person, it's a lot to then go into a group eating environment. What kinds of things can you help your child adapt to prepare them for that? You know, just being around, more movement, more light, as they're ready to accept and tolerate that. Sensory and motor, they feed into each other. Basically, our motor system comes up with a plan, we act it out, and then we use sensory information to tell us how well that went. That was too hard, that was too fast. Ooh, I bit my tongue. Then our body goes, oh, we should change that. Let's do it differently next time. And that sensory information helps us refine that motor plan to make it better for us. So sensory and motor especially go hand in hand. And a lot of the sensory techniques we'll use to help somebody who has poor motor skills. We know, I know because of how that fork feels when I push it into a piece of food, if I'm gonna need to chew it within my back teeth a number of times, or whether I could probably just like munch it 2 times and swallow it down. That sensory information is important for us to know what kind of motor skills we're gonna need and how to use them. Motor is also a big piece of chewing and eating. Some example problems that give me clues that eating is going to be an issue is they don't chew enough. There's food falling out of their mouth. They're coughing, they're choking. They only eat certain textures. They bite the spoon or the cup. After they swallow, there's still lots of food in their mouth. They're very slow. Or there's abnormal reflexes. They gag and cough at every bite. They don't gag or cough at all. They bite on everything in their mouth. They don't bite on anything in their mouth. Some of the treatment things that I'm going to be working on are, what can we change about the food or the tools or the utensils to make it work better? I might try some oral massage or stimulation. I might try some tactile thermal stimulation. That is fancy words for I'm going to use some cold or some heat. I might use both. I might switch back and forth. I might use it inside their mouth. I might use it on their face, depending on what is needed. I might do some exercises. I might have them bite on some things or move some things in their mouth or push against something to see if we can build up some stamina of the muscles. If they have hyperactive gag reflex, then we're going to try to get that normalized because if you're gagging every time you're swallowing, it is not comfortable. This is where neuromuscular stimulation might come in. So that can be to the face. It can also be to the throat. That's that pharyngeal muscle. There are some different treatment approaches, but some of these are just also techniques and exercises that we therapists pick up from other therapists, and they don't belong to any particular protocol. So myofascial release is one of them, the Beckman oral motor stretching protocol. Talk Tools has a bunch of different techniques and protocols, and then the neuromuscular electrical stimulation is the vital stim. So over here you can see somebody doing Beckman on a baby's lip. You can see a kiddo with NMES here on his cheek. There's a kiddo biting on a bite tube. There's another kiddo who's probably getting some tongue lateralization work in that kind of bottom middle photo. On the top right, you'll see a kiddo who's got some electrodes on his neck. He's probably working on some pharyngeal swallowing issues. And then that bottom right corner is a laryngeal mirror, but what we do with those is we stick them in the freezer. And then we use them to stimulate different points in the back of the mouth, which may encourage you to swallow. There's a number of points that trigger a swallow. Some kids, the ones in the oral cavity are not acting as quickly as they need to, and so the swallow doesn't actually get triggered until the food's a little too far back. If that's the case, then I'm going to work to try to normalize those ones in the oral cavity. Things you can do if your child has motor issues, please respect their no. I'm going to say this until you're sick of it. Because there's a reason for it. Know your child's motor system. If they tend to be weaker on one side than the other, that means they're probably going to chew them better on that stronger side. If your child tends to be kind of hypotonic or kind of low tone, all over, that's going to be true in their mouth. If they're high tone and they tend to be kind of rigid in their muscles, that's going to be probably true in their mouth. Give them that sensory input. That sensory is going to improve their motor. And work on the support that they'll need, the support in their trunk and their head that's going to help them be safer to swallow and to eat. Cognitive and behavioral issues. Some things that might indicate that's an issue is they only eat the least amount they can. They eat better with certain people. Oh, they always eat better for grandma than for me. Challenging behaviors that, well, he'll eat, but only if, I promise him this, or, I have to plead and beg. Or they overeat. They're always eating. That grazing eating pattern where they just snack little bits throughout the day, but they never really have a good meal. Meal times are always a fight. They only eat chicken nuggets from McDonald's, or they only eat goldfish crackers that come in the blue package. Or they only eat the Cheerios from the yellow box. Things like that. There's not really a treatment approach that addresses that specifically because quite often the behavior is rooted in something else. It's because I can't handle the different consistency. It's because when I try to eat more than this very small amount, I get tired and I start to choke. I only like the chicken nuggets from McDonald's because they're all chopped up and nice and easy to chew, and the ones from Chick-fil-A are more like real chicken and I have to chew them harder. Try to figure out why there's that behavior and then go from there. Is it more motor or is it more sensory? This is not something I expect everybody to figure out on their own. This is something that usually is a result of talking with your therapist and talking with other people and well, what do you think this is the cause? Why do you think this is? And let's work and use what each one of us observes to come up with a hypothesis. What's going to increase the desired behavior? What's going to make them want to do it more? And then what's going to decrease the undesired behavior? I have been a part of a behavioral feeding program. I don't think it's a great thing for most kids, apart from working on the sensory and motor skills. Some children do develop some behaviors. Very often they're rooted in experiences that have sensory and motor components. There are kids for whom it works really well. It's just figuring out what your child needs and what their issues are. Some things that we might try to help with that would be visual supports. What are our expectations? What are the things that are okay and not okay? A reinforcement schedule. If you're not motivated to eat because it doesn't feel good, well then what is motivating for you? If your child no longer has a great sense of hunger and fullness, well then what is reinforcing for them? What does make them want to keep doing something? And then what's going to make that environment a little bit more successful? What's going to help? And if that means we do need to be in a quieter environment, that's what we do. I had a kiddo who would touch things to her lips and immediately wanted it to drop on the floor. And I was not going to pick up pieces of food all the time, so I just put a bucket next to her because she always did it on the left side. Another thing I've tried with kids is I put them in a corner. So if they're going to kick, well then I can just turn them to the wall real quickly. Whatever is going to help us kind of move through that. Things you can do: respect the no, there's a reason for it. Figure out why. Consider distractions carefully. If your child does eat better with a movie on the phone, I'm not suggesting you should just take that away, but use it carefully. Meaning is this something I really want to do for the rest of their life? If not, well then how can we work towards, getting that out of the way? If your child is very easily distracted, then try to remove those distractions. Try to make it as positive as possible. Ignore what you can and try to remain calm, even if you feel like they're doing things just to get your goat. Reduce the pressure and the opportunities for challenging behavior. If your child is fond of dumping things, I probably wouldn't put the bowl within their reach. Know about how your child thinks. Do they understand cause and effect? Do they understand directions and sequences, like first do this and then you get this? And what's motivating to them? Do they like praise? Do they like toys and music? Do they feel proud when they've done something on their own? What is going to make them motivated to try it? Again, these are not things that I would do without working on motor and sensory, but some examples would be hey, maybe we need some visual reminders of what you're supposed to be doing. Maybe you need some sort of external motivation. So, hey, you eat so many bites and then we're going to get to do this. That is not always something that is our end goal, but it is something to move through. I'm so sorry, I'm running out of time. Social parts of eating, we want to be able to eat with other people. These slides will be posted to the website. So some things that you can do about that if your child is only eating better for certain people or in certain places, why? Ask yourself, why are they doing that? And then what can we do to make, for me, a big part of the social part is eating with other people and feeling comfortable doing so. What kinds of other things can we do to make that possible? If you're going to eat better in a quiet environment, how can we make our meal times quieter? If you're going to eat better in a noisy and lively environment, how can we make that better? I had a kid who ate better in Mexican restaurants. We played Mexican music and, we put out chips and salsa on the table. Not that he was going to eat it, just so it was there. How can we make it more fun? How can we make it more enjoyable? I have a lot of adaptive equipment on this page because I didn't know where else to put it. But if it helps you eat with other people because you can eat more on your own, to me that's a social component. I had a kiddo who, I say kiddo, was really a young adult, wanted to be able to go to Starbucks and drink a drink like other people her age that wasn't in a sippy cup. So a lot of what we worked on was just, what can we do that would be more like what people your age do? And it didn't have to be great, it didn't have to be perfect, it just didn't have to be like a kitty-looking cup to her. And so that's what we worked on. You only have to remember a few things. Go slow, start where your child is, follow their lead, make small goals and small changes, listen to them when they say no, and involve them at the level they can be. If your child's just doing taste, that's great. Do it around a mealtime. If your child is, only ready to really touch foods, that's fine. What can they touch? And remember that variety will eventually lead to quantity and quality. The variety is experiences. The variety of experiences you can give your child will eventually lead to them eating more because they are building up practice, they're building up skill, they're building up positive experiences, and eventually that will result in more of them eating more healthy food on their own safely. But know that it takes time and everybody's journey is going to be a little different. Anybody have any questions? Yes?
Hi.
Hi.
So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing, which really, well, no, that's the first thing that stuck out. But one thing when you were talking about the nerves that's right here that impacts, like, I guess, smell. How can that be tested, or how do we know whether or not a child is able to smell things? Like basically, how do we know that that's working? Are there tests that can be run with an ENT or something?
Because it's nerves, yes. My guess is yes. My guess is they could do what's called a myelogram, which is they provide some sort of like electrical input and then they trace it to see how far it's going. If you wanted to see for yourself, then I would try some very strong odors and see if there is a reaction. So like essential oils are very potent. Some of them are, when I smell them, it makes my nose go, like eucalyptus or mint, because it has a menthol in it. We tend to have a reaction to it. So wave that under your child's nose. Do they react at all? Do they turn their head? Do they lift their eyebrows? Do their eyes open wide? Just anything means I've registered it. Now it can be, I don't like it, and it can be like, ooh, that's really interesting. Either way, they've registered it. What about cinnamon? Cinnamon has a very potent smell. What about, this is almost cruel, an onion. Onions are very, very strong, and I'm not saying push it up their nose and rub their face in it. I'm just saying wave it under their nose and see if they respond. That'll give you a good indication of, okay, they at least have some sensation here. They have some registering, and then then from those really strong scents, you can try something a little bit more subtle and see like, are we still getting a reaction, or is it kind of fade? And that'll just give you an idea of like, well, okay, so maybe we need to kind of like up the input of this, or we're going to have to give them a lot of taste input to kind of help with that. So my guess is yes, there are tests. That would be a neurologist who would deal with that. So, but you can try some things at home just to see what comes up. Yeah. Anybody else with a question? All right. Well, thank you very much.